We say good morning if you're watching on Peacock. Thank you for downloading the app. And our radio affiliates around the country, numbering over 410, including our latest, San Diego Sports 760. And one of the radio hosts there, former NFL offensive lineman Rich Ohrnberger, joining us on the program because we got some headlines here, or at least potential headlines. The Chargers' Justin Herbert diagnosed with a plantar fasciitis injury, and he's in a walking boot. They're hopeful he'll be ready for week 1. Rich, thanks for joining us. What's the level of concern? What should be the level of concern for Charger fans?
Pretty high. I heard you and the Danettes talking about this earlier, and one of your guys suffered from plantar fasciitis. I dealt with this in my playing career as well at one point, and it's excruciating. It's one of those things where it could nag you for a long time. And with a quarterback like Justin Herbert, who doesn't stand like a statue in the pocket, who is going to get outside the pocket and create, who I'm sure Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh are going to incorporate some level of planned QB run in this offensive scheme this year, they're going to have to rely on his lower body too to help this offensive line, especially when you look at some of the paltry running stats they had last year. That's something they want to build upon this year in 2024. So this should be a huge concern for Chargers fans. Now, there's a gradient of severity with any injury. We don't know exactly how severe this is, but they are using an abundance of caution here, putting him in a walking boot to make sure to immobilize that ankle and the foot as best they can. And this is one of those injuries where you can't just like train your way through it. You got to wait for the inflammation to come down and then slowly get yourself back incorporated into playing full speed. And like I said, at any point, if you aggravate this again, it can put you right back to the starting line. So this is a big concern right now.
How's Jim Harbaugh doing so far?
I'll tell you right now, weird works. And Jim Harbaugh, he's a weird guy, and I dig it. I think that Jim Harbaugh is doing a great job instituting his culture really fast. Also, if you really look around this team, in a lot of ways, they've kept some of the leaders on offense and defense, but he's cleared the decks. I mean, this team is vastly different overall than it was last year from a personnel standpoint. So he is trying to build this thing from the ground up. And I do mean from the ground up. I mean, 5 wins is unacceptable for a team that has a quarterback with as much potential as Justin Herbert. And like I said, like that quirky vibe that he puts out, I think, Gen Z, as they're making their way to the NFL and the generation behind them, they're into quirky and they're into people trying to meet them where they are. And I think Jim Harbaugh does a great job. He's worked with young athletes his whole life, obviously in the college ranks. He had that stint with the 49ers, which was brief but successful. So I think this is one of the best hires that the Chargers have had in 2 decades. I'm really excited to see what it looks like this season.
What's the level of hope? Maybe hope isn't the best word. What's the level of success that Charger fans should expect?
Better than last year.
Well, that could be 6 wins.
Look, yeah, Rome wasn't built in a day, Dan. It takes time. Football's a brick-by-brick sport, and when you lose names like Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and even Gerald Everett, who all were, huge security blankets in some ways, but the go-to guys for Justin Herbert over the course of his time as the Chargers quarterback. And you're restarting essentially with some of the guys left over from last year, some of the guys who didn't perform as well, like Quentin Johnson, who had a slow start. He caught on at the end of the season, or Joshua Palmer, who was out for a good stretch with injury, but then got in there and he contributed. I think he finished with just over 500 yards. They bring in Ladd McConkey, who is a great route runner. He can sort of play inside and outside. But, you're dealing with all new. And so we don't know what to expect. And in the backfield, too, Gus Edwards comes in. You hope that he can continue some of that success, generating touchdowns. He had 13 last year with Baltimore. He was a 4+ yards per carry guy. So look, there are things around this offense that make sense. And like I said, they kept some of the familiar faces on the defense too, like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, who Mack had the best season of his career with 17 sacks last year. But him and Bosa haven't played a full season together yet as Chargers because there's injury situations. And Derwin James, he's a stud, making a ton of tackles, but his pass coverage is iffy. Look, every position group you go to, there's good and there's bad. And so Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman on the offensive side especially have their work cut out for them. We'll see what happens, but I would expect them to be better than last year. But I wouldn't put our expectations like, hey, wild card or playoff berth. I think there's a lot of work to be done here.
How important is it to be on par or better than the Rams being in the same building, same
It's
city?
very important.
Yeah.
It's super important, Dan. You've seen it. Both the Rams and the Chargers have struggled with their home crowds. Many times you see takeovers when strong visiting fan bases, who many of which live in LA or many of which would love to spotlight or circle a vacation game in the middle of the colder months elsewhere in the United States, and they'll pick that destination in LA and they'll go support their team. And so when the Steelers play in LA, you see a lot of terrible towels. You know what I mean? When the Vikings play in LA, I mean, the skull chants rain down. So it's pretty impressive what's happened in that building. But yeah, when you're playing, alongside a team that has been so recently successful as the Los Angeles Rams, and even they're struggling to reestablish their fan base from 2.5 decades ago, it's yeoman's work for the Chargers.
Talking to Rich Ohrnberger, co-host of Big Rich, TD, and Fletch on San Diego Sports 760. Also, you played with the Patriots. Do you have a favorite Belichick or Brady story that you're allowed to tell?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Well, plenty of them.
You can't get in trouble now, so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're both retired, or I guess Bill's on a vacation.
Yeah.
But Tom's retired. One of my favorite memories, and I just recently told this story for the first time publicly. It wasn't a good memory at the time, but it turned into a great story, was Bill, he puts the fear of God into you when you're a rookie. Any mistake you feel like could be the mistake that gets you shoved right out the door. And I was a 4th round draft pick in 2009. And I woke up one morning, not to the sound of my alarm, but to the sound of like birds chirping and the warm New England sun on my face. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm late. I can't believe it. And so there's a squad meeting happening in 10 minutes and I'm 15 minutes away. So I throw on a pair of sweats. I sprint down to my garage. I hop in the car and I am just flying through this neighborhood trying to get to work. Well, so anyways, I'm rounding a bend and I'm looking at the car and at the clock on the dashboard. And I'm not a math guy, Dan, but I'm doing some quick mental. I'm not getting there in time. So I see a church van at the red light in front of me. And I go, I'm going to hit this van. I need an excuse to be late to work today. So I at maybe 10 miles per hour, I'm creeping into it, but I bump bumpers with this church van in front of me. And he pulls, he's making a right-hand turn. So he pulls over to the right. I pull over behind him and I'm completely sweaty and just hyper. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I called up the team assistant Bears. I was like, hey, Bears Nigerian. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he worked with Bill for all those years. And I say, hey, Bears, I'm not going to make it in on time. I got into an accident and blah, 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 and this and that. And he goes, hey, take your time. We get it. Just when you get in here, check in with me. I'm like, okay. I hang up the phone with him. Out from the front seat of the car of the church van I hit was this white bearded man who worked for a church. He looked like Father Time. This guy was 100 years old. And he's slowly making his way to my driver's side door. And I roll down the window. I'm like, no, stay where you are, sir. I'll come out. As I'm saying a torrential downpour on this poor old man who I just intentionally rear-ended to have an excuse not to be late to the building. So I hop out of the car. We exchange information. I give him every single dollar in my pocket. I think I had, it was like a handful of cash. I think I gave him my social security number. I'm like, whatever you need, sir, you call me. We'll sort it out. I'm late for work. If you don't mind, I'm gonna get out of here. Is that cool? And he was like, it's okay, young fella. Just take your time wherever you're going, and God bless you. And I'm like, I am going to hell. So I drive to the building, and my offensive line coach meets me in the hallway, and he dressed me down like I've never been spoken to before in my life. I mean, it was a mother effer this and a I can't believe you. If you worked at IBM and instead of being this spoiled football player, you'd be thrown out on your head with a fern and a laptop. You SOB, this and that. Dante Scarnecchia, a scary dude when he was angry. So he goes, now get in the offensive line meeting room and you wait for me. So I go in there. The whole team arrives. We're going through a normal day of meetings. He doesn't really address it other than to say that I let down the whole team, the whole group. And he was right. Accountability is an important thing. Later in the day, I'm walking past Bill in one of these long corridors in the Patriots hallways. And I mean, you can't avoid him. There's no doors to duck into. I couldn't pretend I was reading something. I mean, we're coming at each other. And he's making direct eye contact with me. And Dan, that is, I mean, you can feel that in your loins. I mean, it's scary stuff. So he stops in the hallway and he goes, hey. I'm like, hey. He goes, you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. We're about to go out to practice. He goes, okay, good. He goes, you were late today. I go, yeah, I'm so sorry. I had a car accident. He's like, yeah, I know. I saw it. And I was like, you saw it? And he goes, and he just shakes his head. And I say, okay, I apologize. It'll never happen again. This and that. And he doesn't say a word. He just goes, okay. And he just walks past me. And somehow I got out of it, continued my career with them. But that was one of those first moments where I was like, oh, this is different from anything I've done before. Like, there's no getting away with anything. You have to be accountable every day. And so it's a fun story to tell, but I thought I was going to be back in Nassau County on Long Island cutting deli meats again. I thought my career was over, but I digress.
Well, you are going to hell.
I am going to hell. I'm for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that was inexcusable, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for welcoming us to San Diego Sports 760, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you, Rich.
That sounds great, Dan. Thank you.
That's Rich Ohrnberger. He's a co-host of Big Rich, TD, and Fletch in the afternoon. San Diego Sports 760, former NFL Penn State guard.